Right, so impact culture. How can we motivate change in what is an increasingly metricised academy, where all that counts is what we can count, it would seem. And to do this, we're going to be working through some content from my most recent book, Impact Culture. And as a thank you for coming along today, I'm going to put into the chat the PDF and the audiobook version of this book. So enjoy. I'm going to put a few other things into the chat as we go, and I'll send this to you after the training, along with my slides via an email from Eventbrite. So I want to go to the heart of this with our first discussion exercise. And essentially what we're going to get out of this at the end is, well, what actually is culture? And then what is an impact culture as perhaps a subset, a part of the research cultures that we live and work in, as academics, as research professionals, as others in the higher education sector. And to get into this in a way that for me has real meaning, that resonates, that enables us to start taking charge of shaping our own culture, I would like you to answer this question on screen in the chat, please. What do you love most about your work? What inspires you most? When you think back to the last time that you came back from work with that overwhelming sense of satisfaction, that you were raving to your loved ones about, wow, this happened today. What are the things that are most likely to give you that sense of inspiration? And we've got lots of people who are expressing a sense of curiosity. Marnie is saying it's about finding something new that's an important piece of the puzzle to make things better for others. We've got lots of other colors and flavors of this sense that I get to learn new stuff, whether that's through my research, whether that's through supporting academics, whether it's just through working with students, whether it's brand new things, discovery, or just getting to discover new stuff through reading and interacting with others day in and day out. We've got people who are thinking more about creativity, Luciana being creative in the generation of impact, others who are ultimately wanting to make a difference in various different ways. So Jane making a difference with the skill set of the people I work with. Emily helping researchers realize that they can have an impact with their research and helping them to work out how to do that in their discipline. But also just getting to hear about the incredible research that goes on around our university. So what I want you to do now is to stand back from your answer to this and ask yourself a deeper question. This is going to be a rhetorical question. I'm not going to ask you to write this down, but I'd like you to look at your answer and see if implicit in what you've written, you can see now a sense of your identity. So yeah, you've talked about roles, perhaps. I support researchers, I help other people, I teach, I discover new things, I'm a researcher. But can you go deeper than those roles to get a sense of who you are? So yeah, I'm not just any old lecturer. This is the kind of lecturer I am. I'm a facilitator. That's what I do. It's not about getting information out to people. I enable people to become the best version of themselves, perhaps. Yes, this is about being a researcher. It's about discovering new things. But actually, in terms of my identity, I'm an adventurer. That's what I am. I can't help but to ask new questions. I'm fundamentally a creative. That is my identity, perhaps. And as you look at those identities, I wonder, can you see beneath them values? So yeah, I'm an adventurer, and that's because there's a value that lies beneath this. I am curious, and actually that's a value. I live life curious. I'm not just a curious researcher. I'm a curious parent who wants to encourage curiosity in my children, but is also curious about how I can be a better parent, for example. That's just how I live life. It's a value, it's a principle, it's a fundamental belief, perhaps, in how I do what I do. Yeah, I help others. And this now, that identity is informed by some kind of value, which is, I don't know, altruism, love. There's something deeper beneath those identities that inform, that shape, that inspire, that explain why we are who we are, which in turn explain why we are that kind of researcher, that kind of lecturer, that kind of professional services colleague to my other colleagues in my team and to the people that I support. And finally, as you stand back from the answer you gave in the chat to my question, what do you love most about what you do? As you look at those layers beneath that answer, your identities and your values, do you get a glimpse of the meaning you derive from work or your purpose? And for most of this is still, yeah, a little ill-formed. But it's something I can feel towards. And actually, the more I sit and meditate on this and think about this, the clearer this becomes. And this might seem like a very personal and perhaps an unusual place to start a session on impact culture. But I'm going to suggest that this is a foundational place because this is a sociological definition of culture. Culture as a way of co-creating meaning together. And in any work culture, I'm going to suggest that this is therefore the co-creation of meaning at work. And there's a rich literature on meaning of work that we can draw on to go in lots of depth if we want to. Perhaps sociologists amongst us might want to draw some of that out, critique or add to this. But the point I'm trying to make here is that we all get glimpses of that meaning and hence our purpose when we think back to the things that we love and that have inspired us in work. And so if we want to create a culture that has meaning at the level that is consistent with who we are, therefore that enables us to bring our authentic selves to work, so that we can now feel at that deep level like we actually fit, that we belong somewhere, then we need to understand first of all who we are, why we are who we are, and the meaning and purpose that we derive by expressing those values authentically through what we do day to day in our work. There's other psychological theory we can draw on here that explains why it is now, once we understand this, that in certain groups, in certain projects, when I'm doing certain tasks, there's this really deep sense of flow that I'm meant to be here. And very often, when you think about those things that you love, that inspire you most, that's what's going on here. There's a deep sense of you expressing who you are linked to your values and finding meaning and purpose in work. And of course, this also explains why so many of us feel disconnected from work, disconnected from the teams we're meant to be working with, especially from the institutions that we are part of, because at some deep level, there's a disconnect. I don't feel I can be authentically me and bring my full self to work without judgment. I don't feel that I can actually enact my values because, in fact, I'm working in a system that is systemically undermining those values and perhaps even working against them. And as a result, there is this sense of the rug being pulled out from beneath me, because that sense of meaning and purpose that I am seeking, that I am craving, actually is constantly being undermined by a system that actually seems to have at its purpose efficiency, enabling us all to produce more and more excellent outputs in less time. And that has started to apply to impact, of all things, as well. This thing that for so many of us brings us a sense of purpose, whether it is that we want to make a difference, or it's just, as someone said, the creativity of how I generate impact, the curiosity of having to answer questions like that to address real-world problems that don't respect disciplinary boundaries and enable me to be more and more enthralled by what I do. And that has become instrumentalized, metricised, turned into something that, yeah, it feels like I no longer fit. And so this is my way of hopefully taking you in already to what is for me both a bottom-up and an inside-out framework that explains what's going on in terms of how we fit within any culture, but in particular within a research culture, and as a subset of that within an impact culture, how we do impact, how we derive meaning collectively around impact together in the academy. And so as we think about impact culture and how we co-construct meaning from work, I want to start thinking now in a much more fine-grained way about this. I'm going to introduce my impact culture framework to you, and I'm going to make room for some discussion. So if this is provoking any reactions from you, things that you disagree with, things you'd like to build on, you can start adding them into the chat already. If there are questions, but also if there are actions, I'm realizing, that explains something already, and I need to do something about this. Then I'm going to invite you to create some intentions in a moment as well before we move into discussion. So impact culture, I'm going to suggest in the UK, and the same applies to a lesser extent, but it depends where we are in the rest of the world. Whether it's our funders, whether it's the engagement and impact framework in Australia, whatever it might be, our cultures are often shaped by our institutions, which in turn are shaping these in response to funder mandates or mandates from government. And we have to actually call this to consciousness if we are going to create a healthy impact culture on purpose. And this isn't about headhunting new people, waiting for a new dean or head of school to come in. I'm going to suggest this is about us, about each and every one of us. It's about how we think. It's about how we behave and what we can co-create around us. Just with one or two or three people around us, we can create a bubble. We can create our own culture. It is possible. And in the worst case scenario, that's what you can do with the material I'm presenting here today. You can create a bubble within a toxic culture simply to survive. The hope being that that can gradually now spread, and you can broaden the sphere of influence around what you are able to create. But at its best, this is something now that can, from the bottom up and from the inside out, spread from one person to the next, from group to group. But this is not about doing something which is a one-size-fits-all approach, because by definition, there can be no such thing as a unitary impact culture in any organization that values freedom of thought and that respects the values and identities of the people within that organization. We have to be able to create our own cultures around us based on our values and beliefs. And that means that there will be, by necessity, multiple subcultures, all jostling together within any healthy higher education institution. This is not the army. This is not a corporation that can dictate values from the top. That's not to say there's nothing wrong with that, with having some motherhood and apple pie statements at a high level about the things that we value, but they're not actually going to change what we do at the grassroots day to day. So inside out, me, my group, and whatever bubble I can create, worst case scenario, or perhaps better, as this now becomes something that perhaps mainstreams elsewhere, that influences others within my discipline, and ultimately changes how I engage and others engage with people beyond the institution and our discipline and academia. And perhaps even begins to start influencing some of these external drivers, which is what we're seeing in the UK. A lot of people saying, you know what, this is creating carnage, and actually you guys in charge of breath need to do something about this. And that feedback is beginning to happen already, we can see. But it starts with us as individuals realizing what's going on and starting to take control as far as we can for ourselves. But this is not only inside out, this is bottom up as well. Here's my definition, and I'll put into the chat the paper that we published this in as well. And I'm going to work through each of the different components of this. And I think we'll maybe then stop and break for some discussion at that point. So let's just put into the chat the here we are. Here's the journal version of the paper where you've got this as well, but I'll send you all of these in an email later. So I'll work through these in a diagram form. Actually, I think that's probably the easiest way of doing this. And essentially the idea here is that if this is an impact culture, we need this to be based on rigorous and ethical research, and some quite interesting questions now around what do we mean by research, given the most recent reforms in the UK. But this has to be about rigorous research, not flaky stuff that could end up actually leading to negative unintended consequences. And we need to think about the ethics of that research as well. Right, so we've got that firm foundation now for a research impact culture. Secondly, this is something which is born out of community. And so, yes, this is inside out, and yes, this is bottom up, and this is now about me and my colleagues within academia. But it's also about me and those people I interact with outside academia as well. And what we're talking about here fundamentally is social capital. And by that, I mean two aspects, a breadth and a depth element here. So this is about extending your networks. But for busy people like you and me, yeah, there's only so much we can do that. And for most of us, the task here is about extending our non-academic networks, which we may not have so much of. But for me, most importantly, this is about the depth component as well. How often do we go out for a coffee with a colleague? How often do we go to disciplinary meetings, networks, conferences? Compared to how often do we go out for a coffee with someone from the third sector, business, a policy colleague, someone that we are helping with our research from beyond the academy? How often do we go to their meetings, their conferences, their networking events? Maybe there's something I need to do there. And finally, purpose. This is at the heart of this, and a foundational idea that if I understand who I am, what my values are, and how I derive meaning from work, then I can find others who have compatible values and identities, who are able to work in similar ways. This is not that we have to all be identical to each other, but we can find those people, and now we can create that sense of belonging. And so the example I always give is when I was at University of Leeds, it was in the Sustainability Research Institute, which was part of a school which had a whole load of oil and gas engineers in it. And as you can imagine, the staff meetings were sometimes somewhat colourful, and we were working against each other. But that's not to say that our oil and gas engineer colleagues did not want to achieve impact. They did. They were passionate about creating graduates who could go and get high quality jobs in an industry that they believed was generating economic growth and helping people ultimately through money. And of course, there were these fundamental different values and beliefs underpinning what they thought was impact versus what we thought was impact. And that is okay. That is as it should be, I would argue, in any institution that values freedom of thought. It's not about us all having the same values and beliefs as each other, although cancel culture might make you think otherwise. I believe that there's something badly wrong if we dictate people's values from on high. We need to value that, the difference, and equally gravitate towards and find those within our institutions that we can productively work with to create cultures within which we can belong. And of course, finally, this idea of capacity. Framing all of this, that we need leadership, we need resources, we need a whole load of other stuff which you can read in the book. And in fact, at this point, I'm going to give you my impact culture toolkit to shortcut you to all of that. So I'll put this link into the chat, but let me just show you this. This is the book page where you've got most of the content already open access. We are on one of today's free training and discussion groups, but there's a whole lot of other ways in which you can get active in this. And right at the bottom, here is that impact culture toolkit, all of the practical ideas from across the book, all in.
Thanks, Mark. Great as ever. I especially love love. Because when you said that, I thought, God, that's me. I mean, it's a strange thing to say, but that I think is true of what this is doing. But being a bit more, I guess, difficult is the issue of culture. And the idea that you can design or create cultures. And in particular, that sense, yeah, culture is those kind of unseen, unspoken ways that we absorb, that we just do. And it's fabulous when we've got that. And of course, you will help and generate ways of doing those things. But I speak not only from the kind of general intellectual sense of I don't know that you can create a culture. It's something that emerges, but can you? So that's can you do that? But also a worry in my own little neighborhood where I've been feeling and witnessing culture changes coming from somewhere that historically did impact in a sense. It was part of the culture. It was just stuff that people did without doing it. And we're getting younger generations of people coming through. And I'm thinking about your overlapping circles and pressures. They're going that culture changing because younger people coming in are bringing values of a different kind from elsewhere, which I would perhaps pejoratively describe as jobs worth. Kind of, what are my hours? I'm not doing that. I'm blah blah blah. Not being absorbed into a culture, but changing the culture. And I find that a problem. I'm just airing that. I don't know if there's anything you or anybody else can do about it. But it does come back to the question of culture as being something maybe more organic. But can you create it? That's what I'd be really interested to know.
Yeah, so this is, I think, the tension at the heart of this approach, which is I'm saying you can't. By definition, this is something that has to be co-created by people and it will evolve. And so then, whilst I might be empowering your average academic to say, let's now co-create something around me, what do you do if you're a head of school? I'm a dean. I'm in charge of impact for a particular group. What can I do at an institutional level? And for me, then, I'm going to go back to the toolkit and I'll just pull out a few ideas. You can dig into them in the book. The key thing here is that you are making space, building capacity, enabling people to do that themselves rather than you doing it for them. And this is, of course, the leadership conundrum, that you become a leader and you think I need to lead from a front with a big vision and get everyone to follow me, when in fact, the most effective leaders lead from behind and facilitate others to find the things that will, certainly in an academic context, bring them most joy and satisfaction. And so here's my toolkit again. And so straight up, I'll take one from each of these, the idea of, I have not changed the language in this yet. I no longer use the word stakeholder, but we're going to make space now as a department, as a group, to map who we are currently working with. And you'll see in my book, and we might even do this after the break, I'm still trying to decide which activities we'll do after the break, some concentric rings that enable us to think what's going on in our department, in our school, in our broader university, in our disciplinary networks, and ultimately out to those broader non-academic networks. And start to look, okay, we've got some key strengths. It seems everyone's working with this organization. Should we be building on that? What could we do together that would add value, that would enable us to collaborate, to be more creative, to do more stuff together as a group, now that we now know we're all working with this organization? But equally, are there some major blind spots? So why on earth, if this is what we are about as a group, do we not work with that government department, for example? Is there something we could do in that space? And ultimately, I'm not telling anyone to do this, but I'm creating these creative collisions between people who didn't realize they were working with the same organization, or others who think, well, yes, actually, what we're doing here could be adapted for them, and here's how it could work. And now I'm excited and I want to go and do this myself, for example. Under priorities, I've written extensively about this, and we do training and we do coaching in our company, but this idea of a coaching process. So let's just instantly upgrade our mentoring program, which often people feel intimidated by and judged by when this is done by senior academics, to a coaching program, which is actually about me identifying my goals, which can include extracurricular goals as well. And finding a way to make that stuff happen. And now rediscovering that sense of purpose and finding a space where I can work towards making that happen. And for some people, that might be impact. For some people, that might actually be getting out of academia, for all I know. But I create those spaces to enable people to find their own sense of purpose. In community, let's take that first idea, creating a compassion culture. Loads of really creative, practical ideas, and there's an exercise we might do after the break on this. But some very simple things. So let's do a seminar program on learning from failure. Let's get our supposed research stars to kick the program off and explain some disasters in their career and how they recovered from them. To show that, you know what, these people are not impervious to things going wrong. And yes, you can recover from these things and start opening up some spaces for some more vulnerable conversations. As we go around in our research group meetings, instead of just saying all of our successes, perhaps every now and then we just say, you know what, let's have a round of sharing things that didn't go well, our latest rejections, just to normalize the fact that this is a thing and enable us to open some channels of compassion with each other. I'm running out of time, but you can see that there's ideas that we can go across this, and it's about creating those spaces. Andy, over to you.
Thanks, Mark. I'm just sort of reflecting on sort of what you were just saying there, and also this kind of concept of subcultures. And I was thinking, you know, many of us will often be a single person in a higher education institute, where actually we don't have the means, resources to manage so many subcultures around impact. We do need, I think, more consistency and more of a top-down cultural approach, because otherwise we're pulled so thinly, we can't really support anybody. Yeah. And I guess on the flip side to that, we're also often middle managers. So, you know, higher education is led by academics. You know, there's always an academic at the top somewhere making the final decisions on strategy and direction, and they're only there for 3 years before they move on and the next person comes in. And so, you know, equally don't have that power to make a decision about top-down culture, or, you know, so, you know, this becomes, I think, as when you are a professional services person trying to support researchers in their culture journey, I think we often feel at the mercy of impact culture, and with, you know, not the power to make change or to influence, or, you know, we work with 1 or 2 individuals, but that in itself is often not enough. And so I don't really know there's an answer to a question. I just think that's how I'm feeling right now, especially with the new ref coming out, and I have not been through a ref cycle before. I feel very at sea in terms of large cultures that I have no ability to truly direct or influence.
Yeah, great point, and I think it's resonating with other people. I can see nodding, and so I'm going to push back and give you a suggestion of another practical thing that you could do in this space, because I agree with you. Many of us are very thinly stretched. Some institutions, there could be just one person in professional services who does impact in the entire organization. And if that is you, you will know exactly what Andy is talking about. You are so thinly stretched. And so you need some way of being able to strategize. Well, if I'm only going to be able to spend time with 1 or 2 people this month, who should those people be? I need something from the top down that helps me to prioritize that resource. Otherwise, it's just going to be random and I'm not going to be effective. So I agree with you that far, Andy. What I would suggest, however, is that when you are thinly spread, the key thing is prioritizing. And facilitating, and as far as possible, facilitating your academics and others in the institution to do this stuff themselves, And you'll know that already because you'll have to do that. And so then that whole leading from behind thing comes back. And the question is, how do you do that strategically? And so here's an idea in terms of impact strategy from the bottom up. So as an impact strategy, how about we do some training across the institution? And that could be something I do once and do online, something that I do as a trainer-trainer thing for impact leads or just ref leads or whoever I can trust within the department to do this, because it's very simple. And you're basically doing two things. You're explaining what impact is, the idea of impact as a benefit and the distinction between impact and engagement. And secondly, you're giving people some tools to do that stuff, to generate that impact. And so I'm going to give you my impact templates in the chat. Here we are. And I'll actually just share a screen for this as well. So I train people in two things. So this idea that impact is a good, it's a benefit, something very simple. So I get, yeah, that's what we're trying to achieve now. It's not just engagement and engagement for engagement's sake. It's not just creating technologies. These are technologies that need to actually make a difference. Okay, great. I get that, and I've got a sense now of the kind of things that I might be trying to achieve. I'll just skip through the slides, and I'm now training people in these really simple tools. My 3 I's analysis, which says you start any journey to impact, not with a big idea, but by trying to find out who out there has a need. What are those needs? Let's go and talk to some of those people. And based on that, I now create an impact plan. So it's not from within my ivory tower, in my imagination. I've reached out to some people who might potentially benefit. I've talked to them, maybe even with them, we've created an impact plan. And you can see, yeah, that's my 3 I's analysis tool template. You've got it in the chat. I don't want to spend too long on this. But you've also got an impact planning template as a worked example of that in the chat. Great. We've got people who've got this basic impact literacy. We know what impact is. We know how to achieve this, ideally in a co-productive, empathic way, which is going to work according to the evidence. And at the end of this, we have a whole load of teams now who have completed that impact template. This is going to range from PhD projects up to multi-million-pound projects. And if I can now organize that in such a way, maybe on Google Sheets or something, so that I can actually see these. Now, there's a bit of work involved, but this is your work. Your job to strategize is to now look through all of those impact plans, and I start to cluster similar impacts together. So these people are trying to achieve something quite similar. And these people are working with the same or similar organizations. And finally, these people are trying to plan similar kinds of activities. And part of the carrot to doing this work is that your strategic work with your limited time adds massive value by finding economies of scale. Actually, are you guys aware you're all working with the same organization? A, might you coordinate that so that you're being more friendly to that organization and not wasting their time or creating confusion? But B, could you actually pool resources and work together, especially if you are working on similar goals in terms of your impact and you're planning similar activities? Well, all these people are planning some workshops or a conference or whatever else it might be. Let's see how we can now bring those people together to pool resources and help each other. You not get that economy of scale for everyone, but for some people, they'll get that benefit. And what you now have is that bird's eye view. Now, there's not about you clustering through something that says what in theory you should be good at as an institution. It's actually looking at what do we do? What are we doing? Where are those kind of areas of critical mass in terms of groups wanting to see the same kind of change? And that for me now is the kind of thing that someone in your position can do with, yes, some time, but that can add massive value. And now I can say, right, for this year, I'm going to focus on these 3 particular areas of critical mass. This might be where we invest the first tranche of impact funding if we've got some funding or whatever it might be. But there's a rationale for that I can defend. And actually, this is strategic, but it is ultimately from the bottom up. Andy, what do you think? Is this still a bit pie in the sky?
Yeah, I don't want to be really super negative, but it still requires a lot of control and influence I simply don't have, and so my organization has the opposite problem. It's sort of it sort of brings so training, things like that. That's definitely things I can do. I can give people tools and resources. I don't have the ability. I don't have access to funds. I don't have professional services people beneath, not beneath me, but peers working elsewhere with these researchers to do some of this stuff. I don't have access to the ability to bring those economy of scales together for researchers. So it's, I think what it shows is there's a fundamental challenge with the way that my organization approaches this. And we need to think more creatively about it. But I think, it's,
So Andy,
I think it's useful.
So it's great. I think it's a very, very, very fair point. And so in your shoes, what I'd be doing is, I don't have that support. I'm going to now take all of these and yeah, I don't know how I resource this, but I'm going to try and get them all printed out and put onto post-it notes or printed out and cut up with blue tack. And I'm going to now do a workshop, and I'm going to invite the people who've done the exercise to come and just organize these into clusters for me, and now to do small group work to discuss and identify those economies of scale and self-organize and self-mobilize. So a question from Lizzie, if it's okay to move on from that, Andy, can you use allies to gain influence? I don't have influence of my own. Great, so suggestion to Andy, I think, but I have allies that will advocate for me in particular settings. And I think what is nice about this is it's another example of bottom-up. And so you might want to influence how a particular group works, and you can go to their head of group, or you can try and identify a few influencers within that group and do some work with them, add some value to them, see if you can change how they are thinking, for example. And there's a lot more on those kinds of approaches within the book, because I think, we do often need to do that, and that is a more bottom-up way of changing things, especially with difficult, challenging groups who are very resistant to anything. And of course, you may get nowhere, but for me, a one-to-one empathic approach with a couple of influences would be my first way into a very difficult oppositional group. So let's move to that now. And I said what I would do at this point was to dive in a little bit more depth to this framework and get you to start applying this to your own institutional context. Now, for each of us, this is going to be at a different scale. So I need you to think about what is your sphere of influence. So if you are a PhD student, this could be you and your supervisors. It could be you and 2 or 3 other PhD students in the same year as you, in a cohort, for example. All the way up to, I'm head of school, I'm dean of faculty, I'm in charge of impact, in which case that's the unit of scale that you're looking at. So we're looking at primarily a relational scale, the sphere of influence that you might have, at which you might be able to co-create a sense of culture with some of your colleagues. And what I'm going to invite you to do is to choose one question in your group and dive into this question in some depth. And I care more about depth than I do about breadth here. So you'll see there are lots of questions, and this is for you to go away in your own time and use this as a diagnostic questionnaire, and you'll get a really fine-grained sense of your cultural strengths, but also some areas where you might want to think about doing some work. So go and do that in your own time. For now, just choose one question, because I want to see how deep you can go with that one question. And don't spend the whole time deciding which question to go for. If anyone has a question that says that they think, that's interesting, yes, I've got an answer, yes, I want an answer to this, then dive in. If you've got time, you can go for more than one question. I'm going to give you somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes, closer to 15 if I can for this, so we've got a decent amount of time. So I'm going to run through these. So in fact, if I just show you, shows what I was trying to do when I lost connection. If I just show you what the handout looks like, And the key thing is download that handout, make sure you've got that in your group. No, that's the wrong one. Because then yeah, you won't have my slides in front of you. So I want you to keep track of this. So you can see you've got my definition at the top, diagnostic questions. You've got the task here, and then questions under research. And if my internet was working, you would see lots and lots more questions. There we go. Let's stop that because that's clearly not working. And I'm going to pull out a few on screen, but the point is there are many more hidden behind these. And I'll just read one out from each of these screens so you get a sense of what you might want to look at. So how rigorous is my research? Well, of course, it's rigorous. What are you saying, Mark? But actually, hold on a moment. How often do I get asked by editors to think about the broader implications internationally for policy and practice if it's a more applied journal? And I say yes to get into that journal, but in fact, I'm generalizing beyond what my data could really support, for example. Oops. What are we doing in professional services to enable colleagues across different disciplines, in particular social sciences, arts and humanities, to think about the whole open research agenda? Really challenging for many of us in certain disciplines, for example. Secondly, now on purpose. Yeah, how do we talk about impact? Do we use the I word? I was at a department that was very instrumental, very ref and funding focused. And in the broader department, we used the I word only in funding contexts or on ref panels, pretty much. In the small research group I was in, we were all about impact. And we rarely used the I word because we had this rich vocabulary for everything that we did that was impact. And for me, that told me something about our purpose compared to the purpose of the group, which was more about funding capture and rankings and everything else in the wider school. Community, you've got questions on the academic and the non-academic side in your handouts. And on the non-academic sides, how do we manage unrealistic expectations? We may be supporting researchers to put in expressions of interests, to do kind of seed corn funding projects, etc. Are we also guiding them on how to avoid raising false expectations when we know at this point the likelihood of success is slim? And do we actually cause more harm than good by getting training our academics in how to do all of that great engagement to co-produce proposals that by and large don't get funded and just disappoint people? Can we think more deeply about that as well? And capacity, finally, and yeah, could we don't have the time, the resource to create an all singing, all dancing training program, but there are people across our institution who have these skills, who could perhaps co-create a training program with us, for all we know. We don't have perhaps leadership we want, but could we produce that leadership? Could we enable people to do that for themselves through by changing our mentoring program into a coaching program? Can we think more creatively about that, for example? Okay, welcome back, everyone. So we are going to do two things now. I'd like you to write something in the chat, and I'd like everyone, please, to write their reflection. And then we're going to facilitate some discussion, and I think I'll let this discussion run till past. So this is also time for your comfort break. We have been running for some time. So I'd like you to write your comment first before you disappear, and then you can come back for as much of the discussion as you want, or stay for the whole thing. But if you come back at past, we'll then move to our final exercise. We're going to dive into one part of this framework and try out one of the tools that I think is most useful. So I've made my own decision on that, eventually, what we're going to do. So the last half hour will be very practical, to give you some other nice practical actions, hopefully. So in the chat, please, before you disappear, if you are going to take a break till past, share something you learned from that exercise. Perhaps it's a key bright spot, something that is going well that others might be able to learn from in the group. Or perhaps it's some actions you've identified. And again, just writing those down can be powerful, help codify, help you get your thoughts together. So I'd like to encourage everyone to write at least something they feel they learned from that exercise. in the chat, please. I'll just give you some quiet working time to do that. Yeah, some really great insights and actions. Yeah, and people discovering common ground, similarities across different continents, and just getting to work with other people in similar roles to you and see the challenges they're facing. Incredibly powerful. One of the exercises that I do in the Fool training is an exercise around some of the challenges that prevent us bringing our full authentic selves to work and expressing our values, and that prevent us from ever actually doing anything to change how we work. Issues around imposter syndrome, people-pleasing, fear of failure, perfectionism, things like this. And very often it is just the fact that I'm talking to other people who have similar experiences that enables us to be more self-compassionate. And that then creates the basis for the creation of a more compassionate culture as we now go back into our teams, into whatever is our day-to-day work. But we're not going to do that. We're going to do something more practical in the last half hour. And I'd like to invite you now to raise a hand if you would like to ask a question or just explore something with the wider group. So yeah, this is what we were talking about, but we kind of got stuck, or there were two very different perspectives. What do you think, Mark? What do other people think? So over to you. And we've got time now for discussion till past. And remember, this is also your break time if you want a break.
Thank you. This is kind of a very poorly thought out comment at the moment. Hopefully we'll find our way through it. I had a discussion there with Helen, which is great actually around, and I apologize, I'm going to talk about the ref because that's what we focused on, in relation to the timing and where you are in that journey. So I guess the closer you get to whatever deadline there is, things become different. And we talked about the general culture of impact and how it's better to embed it and have it going all the time, forgetting about ref and forget about all the other things. It's something we should be doing anyway, versus, oh my goodness, we've got 4 years to go. What do we need to do right now? So, you know, today's been a lot around embedding impact continuously and having it there as part of our culture. Well, I guess we've talked less around what happens when that perhaps isn't happening now and we know what to do next time, but we're in this position right now. So are there some tools or approaches or things where that might be better to have to think around in terms of encouraging people to think around what they're doing and how we capture that? Sorry, that was a very long-winded.
Well, can I put this question back to you as a group? Because I think this is a question that many of us are thinking about, and I think that we all need to think about whether we're in the UK and we've got a ref deadline looming or not, which is how we just make this part of what we do, rather than allowing, in many countries, it is funding mandates. Our funders want this stuff. Or something like the Research Excellence Framework. How do we prevent them shaping our culture and inevitably focusing this on certain groups of people who are eligible for funding, for example, or more senior? What about the PhD students, for example, our next generation? How do we create a culture that is enabling and empowering for people like that as well, for example? So I think this is a question we all need to address, and there's a lot of institutions, especially in the UK at this point in the cycle, saying, you know what, now is our chance before things start getting too scary in terms of deadlines. Now's a chance to start doing things differently. And so, what are people doing? What ideas have you got? Please share them in the chat or raise a hand to tell us, and let's brainstorm an answer to this, because there are so many creative things that you could, in theory, do. So I'll let you respond in the chat or just raise a hand if you've got a response to this. One of the things that I like to do is to kind of change our language, and I think quite a lot of groups talked about language in some depth, which looks fascinating. I wish I could have been in all of those conversations. And kind of change our language and our structures from reward to celebration. And so much of this is about financial rewards in terms of whether or not I get funding, for example. Even impact competitions, for example, we're going to reward certain people with certain types of impact. And instead, I would argue this is trying to value and celebrate impact in all its many forms, wherever it occurs, including the kinds of impacts that don't fit into the boxes our funders or our institution or ref might want us to fit it into. And that's about understanding what makes people tick, asking the kind of question I just asked to the people you're working with to discover, oh, actually, impact seems to be about teaching for a lot of people. It's about their PhD students, for example, and the difference that they can make to them. That doesn't fit into any boxes that I can find. But actually, if that's what is motivating people, then how can we make that count as well and be valued? And how can we celebrate that creatively? And so that could be now about headlining, doing some stuff in terms of our media work, our communications work, and there's a whole section in my toolkit on that. That says, look, there's this incredible stuff going on. There is no other way of showcasing this and celebrating this, because the funders don't care. Nobody else seems to care about this kind of stuff. But we think this is important, and we're now going to make a fuss of this. We're going to put this on our website. We're going to, yeah, wherever else it might be. But we're thinking creatively about impact prizes. And there's a whole section of that on that in the book, particularly learning from an Irish university whose name I've forgotten, sadly. Carolyn, what have you got?
Thank you, Mark. I was really privileged to be in a breakout room with two amazing women who are impact officers at their university at top levels. So their job, there's Chiara, hi Chiara, their job is to look at the institution as a whole and identify help that researchers need. And that's not something my organisation does at all. And I wonder whether part of the problem, and at Portsmouth, we do still talk about impact in terms of ref, which I've now understand it's probably very outdated, but that's what drives it at Portsmouth. And I wonder, with our funding being squeezed from every angle, whether the ability to have someone like Chiara or Natalie on board is going to be less realistic for quite a lot of institutions. And what do you do if your institution is not willing to fund a Chiara or a Natalie, to have somebody there who really understands impact across the board, not just, oh crap, we've got to write an impact case study next week, but really they're embedding it from day one across everything we do. Any help, Mark, gratefully received.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah, in the chat as well, saying, yeah, we've got similar problems here. Ref is what all of the people above us care about. That's where the funding comes from, the league rankings, whatever. How do we get around that? And I think that it's important to recognise, yeah, that's what's paying for the salaries of many impact officers. That's the justification for why we are investing in this. And yes, it has to be a part of it. But for me, the evidence suggests, not just for me, the evidence suggests that this instrumentalization of this is demotivating. There was a Wellcome Trust survey of over 3,000 researchers that said that there was huge motivational problems across the academy, and impact and the impact agenda was one of the key demotivators for people that felt like, yeah, I don't have academic freedom anymore. I can't pursue the things I want because it has to now all be about impact. And so I think we need to be aware of the fact that if we allow it to be a very narrow focus, it can be really demotivating for many of our colleagues. And that differs between disciplines, of course, but it really can have a big negative impact. And so looking at some of that evidence, pushing back and saying, look, it needs to be broader and deeper, going back to your university strategy, which at its headline will not be all about ref. Actually, what are we about? What are we meant to be? What is our DNA? How can we do that authentically? And now this is about creating a culture in which we value everything that we're trying to facilitate as much as possible to happen, whether or not it fits into those boxes. So impact is just something that we do for our own reasons, because we want to, because that's part of an authentic culture for someone like me expressing who I am. And the result now is that when ref comes along, you've got a whole load of different things to choose from. Yeah, some of it that you facilitated that don't fit into the boxes, but a load of it that does, and without that demotivation. But to come directly to your question, yeah, we can't afford someone like that. Then yeah, that is unfortunate. I think we all now realize the value of people with that specialist expertise, and for me, this is now following my framework as far as possible about getting people to self-organize. And the key thing that you can do is that strategic thinking. You will not have time to do pretty much anything else. It's about how you bring people together, create those creative collisions, create the spaces, create the programs, and that could be self-mentoring kind of between, self-coaching between people with a bit of training, train the trainer type things. So there are things that you can do strategically, but they're going to have to all be about enabling others to do that work and to help themselves. And the way you do that, fundamentally, to come back to the original point, is you have to connect with people's intrinsic motivations, what they care about. And once you understand that and you tailor what you're doing to that, then people are self-motivated to do this themselves rather than you having to do it for them. James, back to you.
It's moved on a little bit. I wanted to respond to Caroline's question, because but it's a general thing. Andy's said several times about not having resources. Surely one of the things about the instrumentalization and ref is that it's the thing that triggers these people to create the resources, and part of it is to find ways to use the ref to trigger resources, but then to work in ways that can spread the love, as it were, spread the word. And to have conversations. I think the biggest asset, if anybody can find time, is just to have conversations with people. You find out what people are doing. We had this discussion in the little breakout group, and it's nice and easy. One person had an institution where they had to deal with 30 people, and you can do it. Somebody else had over 100. That's more of a challenge. So how do you work to have those conversations? But I just want to stress something that Sally, was it Whitman, I believe, put in the chat. But, and this is advertising for one of your forthcoming events, Mark, as well. Yeah, the future ref, because the future ref, yeah, talking about ticking the boxes are going to be different. And among the things in those different boxes is going to be a different threshold for research leading to ref, and a different pattern of engagement and impact, not just the kind of, oh, let's go for the heavy hitting big wham impact case studies, but let's have a broader picture of the culture of impact. And I think this conversation you're leading now, and presumably the one that you're going to lead for the other event, are well worth noting. So that advertise to everybody else the future event as well.
Yeah, really good. I totally agree. Thank you, James. And Diane, if we can make one last comment and then we'll move on. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I mean, it's really echoing what James has just said, that, I mean, I'm the only impact person at my institution, and so I'm working across all researchers, and PGR students get a little bit of training as well. But I think, and I haven't got a complete grasp of what the FRAP said last week, the report, but I think there is room from my initial reading that suggests that the impact statement part of the engagement and impact submission is going to add that broader perspective, so that we're not just focusing on the big hitting impact case studies. We're going to have to report on the wider impacts as well that are happening with UOAs. So there's a incentivization really for institutions to start doing broader impact and not just aiming it at the ref all the time. And it is certainly something that I do when I'm training researchers. I talk about, you know, not looking at short-term ref cycles, but looking beyond that.
Yeah, really valuable. And yeah, we'll see what this does in terms of reforms in the UK. But regardless of whether we're incentivized to do this or not, like you, I agree, this is the right thing to do. that we are incentivizing, motivating, empowering, enabling impact wherever it is, whether or not this is going to make a top scoring case study in the next period or not. And that makes this much more inclusive, especially to early career researchers for whom this often feels just so distant, so beyond our reach. Yeah, James's book, amongst others, suggested that 4-star impact case studies can take decades rather than years, and instantly whole swathes of people being cut out. So welcome back, anyone who was away for your break, and we're going to move to our final segment now. We've got these 4 elements of the impact culture framework, and I'm going to dive into just one of these, which is this idea of our impact community. And I'm going to give you a tool to think about this. We're going to do this as an individual tool, but hopefully you'll see how you can then, if you want, use this with a group of people as well. And you'll see hopefully the power of doing that. So in terms of this inside out, bottom up framework, we're zooming into this kind of middle component of the framework here. We've skipped over some stuff, which you'll see in your handout, and we're skipping over some other stuff afterwards as well. But we're going to zoom on this to finish. A nice practical task. And we're going to do an individual task to start with, and then we'll either have a short breakout or plenary. I'll let you decide what you want to do in terms of how we discuss this. But essentially what we're doing here is trying to understand who can help us facilitate impact in these different concentric circles, starting on the inside with me and my institution. So as I think about who in my institution can help me achieve impact, who comes to mind? And maybe it's a particular team, maybe it's an individual within professional services who could give me help or access to funding, for example. Perhaps this is someone in my department who has been there, done that, has the connections, has the experience, who might be able to mentor me, for example. So who are those people? And for some of us, we realize, oh, nobody. Great, I've got some work to be done, especially if you're new to an institution. Great, you spot that blind spot. When you're doing this in a group situation, we're now sharing as a group, here are some really important key people we need to have on our radar that you might want to go and talk to, for example. Great, so we can share that in a group version of this exercise. And we do that exactly the same with our disciplinary networks. So who now in our wider disciplinary networks beyond our institution can mentor, help us, open doors, introduce us to people, for example? What are those disciplinary networks, conferences that are not just about our discipline, that have people from outside academia coming as well, where I could bump into them and find out what's going on in their worlds? And finally, who are these other non-academic partners, publics, other relevant people? And in particular, at that point, it's worth thinking about marginalized groups. Everyone forgets about these people, and so did I. Let's add them in. And finally, if you're doing this and actually you're new to impact, you've never really done anything in these kind of external spheres, then this is probably going to be more a prospective wish list type idea. So if you, in theory, would I like to be engaging with? And of course, at this point, you can see the value of this when you're doing this in a group type setting. I'm already working with them, and I can introduce you to someone, that kind of thing. You start making these connections. We are working from our handout again, and so let's see if I can show you what this looks like. So in fact, I'll just put it back into the chat. In case anyone hasn't got that to hand. There we are. And if I scroll down this, here we are. Here's, oops, that didn't work. Let's try again. So where are we? Yeah, my impact community is where we're going to. And you've got the instructions on the screen. And we're just going to, once you've downloaded this, you have to download it before it becomes editable. You can move these text boxes around, you can copy and paste them. And we're just placing them in the relevant concentric circle. You might want to cluster similar ones together if you want. So over to you. Try this out. And remember, this is an individual exercise, and you're thinking about this in terms of people or organizations that you can interact with, or that you do interact with, to generate impact. In your handout, I'll give you 2 or 3 minutes on this, see how far you get. Okay, how time flies. Hopefully you've got somewhere with this. And I think what I'm going to do is only a few people are comfortable, I think, talking in the main group. So I'm going to do a paired discussion exercise to then reflect on what you've learned. And I'll just put a few things on screen for you here. Depending on where you want to go with this, yeah, are there things you could strengthen? Are there kind of strategic gaps that you might want to fill? Are there organizations that you're thinking, yeah, I need to follow them up? Yeah, they're in my network, but I haven't spoken to them for ages. So is this about kind of a breadth thing about widening your networks, plugging gaps, or is it more about a depth thing, about re-engaging with someone you've not spoken to for a long time, about taking a relationship a little bit deeper? Yeah, we've met each other in lots of meetings. Why don't we have a one-to-one meeting? And sometimes it doesn't even have to have an agenda. Let's just have a half-hour coffee meeting in the morning before we start work. I'd like to get to know you a bit better, and just ask some questions. Whatever it might be, you've got a whole load of questions in your handout as well that might also stimulate some thoughts, or just talk entirely randomly, whatever this has brought up for you. Let's see, I'm going to give you, let's say maybe 8 minutes on this, so around about 4 minutes each, but I mean, it's going to be a conversation. You don't need to kind of keep time that closely. And we'll do this in pairs, and then we'll come back and we're going to do one final exercise together that's going to bring everything together and give you some more practical suggestions. But in your discussion, actually, it would be great if you can think as practically as possible. Help your colleague to come up with actions they can take. So great, that's the insight. That's where you've gone with this. What could you actually do as a result of that? So in pairs, and just hang around actually in case it takes a minute for everyone to join. I'm hoping everyone joins. If not, then I'm going to have to move a few people around. So over to you, share what came out of this, and in particular, any practical actions and ideas that emerged for you. Now, my hope is that you have all had a chance to think critically about this task, and that by discussing this with your colleagues, this has enabled you to come up with some insights that are hopefully kind of practical. That's the idea. But now, instead of sharing these in the chat as we did previously, I would like you to share or codify what you're thinking about in an exercise, our final exercise of today's session. We're moving to, I think, the penultimate chapter in the book at this point, which is to populate this grid. Now, we didn't use the actions sheet today, so ignore that, but you have hopefully come up with a number of different ideas across the last 2 hours. And if you scroll down your handout, you'll see a little 2x2 grid that looks like this. I'd like you to populate this now in the last few minutes that we have together. Some of these will be things you can do already. Maybe you can't do them. Some of them aren't even actions. I don't have the power to do this. This would be someone else who would have to do this. And this is the conversation that I would have to have. Can I talk to this person about that person yet? And I put it in the can do or can't do conversation. And as you're doing that, you can do this kind of as you go or as a second step, I would like you to then question the assumption. Why can't you do that thing yet? Well, we don't have enough money. Well, where could you get the money? Maybe there's another action, which is to apply for some funding. Well, this person would block us. Well, okay, but is there someone else you could talk to instead? And no, I can't talk to that person, but I could talk to this other person instead, or we could have this conversation first, for example. And so as you interrogate those assumptions, add additional things that you can do in terms of actions and conversations that then mean you've got something concrete that you can do immediately, hopefully, after today's session. So over to you. I'll give you a couple of minutes to think about this and populate this grid with actions and conversations and question your assumptions. Okay, so that's 2 minutes up. If you've not finished this, then just keep working. But if you have, then an optional additional task now is to move to the questions underneath this. So I'm going to give you 2 more minutes, either just to finish off that 2x2 matrix, or if you have time to answer some of these questions. And these are designed to turn this into a bit of an experiment. So I'm going to try this out and I'm going to see what happens. I'm going to collect some data. If it doesn't work, then that's just how things are. Not everything works first time. I'll get that data. I'll think about this. I'll redesign. I'll adapt. I'll do something different. So try and answer these questions if you can. Otherwise, just focus on the first task and you can do this in your own time. Okay. That's your extra 2 minutes up. Hopefully you've all now completed that 2x2. And as a result, you all have something you can do now in the next week, maybe even today. If you get time to think about this, just set that ball in motion. And it is really important for me that we all do something to take that next step. Now, when I'm doing these in my normal trainings, I will get everyone to actually commit to something and I'll follow them up after a month. We've got a lot of people on the training today and we're not going to be doing that. So I'm going to leave you to be accountable on this rather than doing this to me via me. But I would encourage you, maybe that person that you were in a group with just now, maybe you're accountable to them, in which case, maybe you want to send them a message via Zoom or ask them if they can share their email address, and you can then arrange to meet up in a month and swap notes, see how you got on or are getting on with your experiment. So do something, and if you can, be accountable. And remember that we are simply adding something to our schedule at the moment, and that's a problem. We will reach complication because we don't have time. And the idea is that because this is an experiment, and ideally because you've got someone to be accountable to, they will help you and you will help yourself to course correct and internalize these new ways of being, of acting. And you can start to create your own more healthy impact culture in which you can belong yourself. Now, this is the page that I shared with you before with loads more resources, so please do dig into that and into your books. You've got the audiobook and the PDF. This is part of a group of, a range of different sessions that I'm doing. The next one is in a couple of weeks' time, 2 weeks away, I think, 28th. On the ref, but we've got more coming. I've got a voice coach who's going to be designing a session with me in October, so keep an eye on that. And finally, thank you, Verity, who has put something onto Chatter to continue the conversation. So onto the link. So I'm reading the so continue this conversation on Twitter if you would like. It'd be great to hear your thoughts. I will do my best to make some time to contribute later today as well. So thank you, everyone. Link to that is in the chat if you're on Twitter. It's been a pleasure. We are at 12 o'clock, so I'm going to close today's training. It's been a pleasure. Take care.